Today, The Elder Scrolls is a household name. Gaming households, at least. Morrowind, Oblivion, and of course Skyrim are all widely recognizable names, even for people who have never played any of them before. But a lot like the Grand Theft Auto series, most people only really started paying attention to The Elder Scrolls from the third entry onwards. The first two games in the series, known as The Elder Scrolls Arena and The Elder Scrolls Daggerfall respectively, are often overlooked nowadays, despite the fact that both of them, particularly Daggerfall, were highly acclaimed games at the time. They are a little older and a little more primitive, but at times they can also be pretty innovative and unique, even compared to later games in the series. But there's a problem when it comes to trying out these earlier entries. They just aren't particularly easy to get running. Released in 1994 and 1996 respectively, not only are they 30 years old now, they were both released exclusively for creaky old MS-DOS. Despite the fact that Windows was rapidly becoming a thing at this point, DOS still had a very substantial install base, and since Windows was mostly backwards compatible with DOS games at the time, a lot of stuff just released on DOS to cover as many bases as possible. But over the years, that backwards compatibility with DOS has faded away, so to play these games on any contemporary platform, you have to use an emulator like DOSBox. And while emulators are fine, you end up being locked into all of the limitations of the era, like low 320x200 resolution, 4:3 aspect ratio, no controller support, and limited performance. And at the end of the day, nothing beats just being able to click on a game and run it natively. But luckily, while far less popular than the later entries, these games do still have a small but dedicated cult following that are trying to do just that. Bring these games natively into the modern world and also make a lot of improvements to their aging code bases along the way. In this video, we'll cover the 3 major projects that are making or already have made that a reality. The Elder Scrolls Arena was the first game in the series, and while most fans agree it hasn't aged very well, an audience of gamers hungry for computer RPGs at the time managed to make it a small but legitimate cult hit over time through word of mouth. While not the first 3D first-person computer RPG, it was still one of the first big ones at a time when most of them utilized top-down 2D tile-based graphics. It was also one of the first games to feature a realistic day-night cycle where stores and civilians would be around during the day but then close up at night when monsters start to roam. And while there is a main quest that can be completed, the game world is open-ended and infinitely large, with all of its maps being procedurally generated. It was, in fact, the first and last game where the entire continent of Tamriel could be explored, with all subsequent entries only covering small portions of it. Basically, this is a huge game, which makes it all the more impressive that only one person is at the helm of bringing it into the modern era. OpenTES Arena, developed primarily by Afritz1, is a work-in-progress open-source re-implementation of the Elder Scrolls Arena. Unlike a lot of the projects we cover on this channel, this is not a decompilation, since the goal is not to reproduce the original MS-DOS source code. In the words of Afritz1, the vision has always been, make a cool engine from scratch that happens to run the Elder Scrolls Arena. But as simple as that sounds, it's still a tremendous undertaking, with a game that seems equal parts complex and obscure. A lot of game data was hard-coded into the executable, which Afritz has had to painstakingly extract and re-implement himself. Arena apparently even uses self-modifying assembly in some places, making analyzing it even harder. Afritz has called the rendering code black magic as far as he's concerned. He's published a tremendous amount of research on the original game's code to make OpenTES Arena as faithful and accurate as possible, but it's all still very much a work in progress. Right now, you can move around the worlds and dungeons, but not climb any stairs. You can fight enemies, but they don't have any AI. You can see citizens walking around, but you can't talk to them. Of course, all of these things will eventually be completed. We're just looking at a project that's still halfway through development, and what is here looks very promising and very authentic. Every expectation is that once this reaches 100% parity with the original game, it will become the best way to play the Elder Scrolls Arena. And being based on entirely open source and portable libraries, it should finally release the game from its MS-DOS shackles. To try it, you will need a copy of the original game, but it turns out in 2004, for the series' 10-year anniversary, Bethesda actually released Arena completely for free, so really there's nothing stopping you from giving it a shot. But now let's move on to a game that you may have actually heard of. The Elder Scrolls Daggerfall was the second game in the series, and while many feel Arena doesn't have a lot going for it today, Daggerfall is a different story. Unlike Arena, which, as the name suggests, was originally supposed to be more of a fighting game and kind of accidentally stumbled into being an RPG, Daggerfall was a nearly 3-year effort to make the best computer RPG they could. As such, most people agree Daggerfall is where the Elder Scrolls series really began. And while its initial release was plagued with bugs, Daggerfall nevertheless cemented itself as a revolutionary, if flawed, masterpiece. As such, there have actually been not one, but two attempts to revive Daggerfall to a playable state on modern systems, and it's worth noting that despite still being an MS-DOS game, Bethesda effectively rewrote the entire codebase during development, so any attempts to revive Arena are fundamentally incompatible with Daggerfall and vice versa. The first Daggerfall revival project, known as the XL engine, began in 2008 and was an attempt much like OpenTS Arena to rewrite the engine into modern code. But it sadly got stuck in development hell, and momentum had largely petered out after nearly a decade in 2016. But around the time XL engine was dying out, another revival project began, spearheaded by developer Interkarma, and this one ended up being far more successful. It was called Daggerfall Unity, a complete remake of the game written in, you guessed it, Unity. Rather than pursuing sheer accuracy with the original codebase, Daggerfall Unity takes a few more liberties in modernizing the experience. By default, the controls and resolution are upgraded to modern standards, though for purists, it is possible to change the settings to make it look and feel pretty damn close to the original. In addition, Daggerfall Unity fixes a ton of bugs that still plague the original, even after the various updates and patches that were released for it. Situations that would frequently inadvertently softlock the original game simply aren't a problem anymore. Daggerfall Unity also introduces mod support. Mods have become a staple of the Elder Scrolls series, allowing the community to extend the game far beyond the developer's original scope. However, Bethesda didn't officially support them until the third game, Morrowind. But with a new codebase helped in no small part by their usage of the widely accessible Unity engine, Daggerfall Unity is able to implement a comprehensive modding system into Daggerfall for the first time. And unlike OpenTS Arena, Daggerfall Unity is not a work in progress. As of December 31st, 2023, it's fully feature complete, meaning everything that's in the original game is present in the remake, and more. Today, the consensus is that Daggerfall Unity is the preferred way of playing Daggerfall. It's faithful enough that you don't lose anything important by skipping the original, yet it provides a much more stable and improved player experience all around, and can be played natively on anything supported by Unity. That being said, there are some people who still prefer the original, feeling some of the charm and nostalgia is lost with the newer engine. For some players, even the original game's bugs are part of the experience, with some turning into legitimate strats that can be used to assist gameplay. For those people, it's understandably disappointing that those things are no longer present in Daggerfall Unity. But for most people, even those who have been playing Daggerfall for decades, the remake is the one to get. Once again, you'll need the original game, but once again, in 2009, for the series' 15-year anniversary, Bethesda made Daggerfall available completely free too. Daggerfall Unity even provides a pre-prepared package that includes additional expansion packs that you don't get with the official free download. So it really couldn't be easier to give it a shot if you're interested. The retro DOS games might be the most deserving of modernized codebases, but thanks to the sheer popularity of the series, they're not the only ones. Following Daggerfall was Morrowind, the first quote-unquote modern entry in what many still consider to be one of, if not the best of the series. Once again, Morrowind had completely different underpinnings than its predecessors. Bethesda threw out their old engine and licensed a third-party engine called NetImmerse to build their new game on. NetImmerse primarily used Direct3D, and as such, Morrowind was able to land on both Microsoft Windows proper for the first time and the Microsoft Xbox. Rather than using a massive, mostly procedurally generated world, Morrowind's world was a smaller, painstakingly handcrafted one. Bethesda spent the entire first year of development creating what they called the Elder Scrolls construction set, a whole suite of tools for designing and developing every single element of the game. The construction set ended up being released alongside the game itself, launching a modding revolution where just about anything in the game could be changed. Just to give you an idea of how serious the modding scene is for this game, when early previews showed that Morrowind's world was going to be considerably smaller than both its predecessors and its original plans, the community started using the construction kit to try building in the rest of the world established in Arena and Daggerfall, in a mod called Tamriel Rebuilt. This massive undertaking started before the game was even officially released, and is still receiving updates today over 20 years later, making it one of the longest running community modding projects in gaming history. By 2008, Bethesda had stopped supporting or updating Morrowind, having well and truly moved on to its successor Oblivion, released in 2006. But Morrowind's diehard fanbase still wanted more, and by this point was well accustomed to messing around with the game's inner workings. And so began OpenMW, an attempt to fully re-implement Morrowind's engine so the community can continue fixing issues and adding extra features. Like Daggerfall Unity, the result is an experience that's more stable, more cross-platform, more performant, and improves the overall gaming experience. Once again, many feel OpenMW, despite the fact that its developers don't yet consider it feature complete, is the best way to play Morrowind today. But once again, there's a schism between people who prefer the remake and people who prefer the original, and here the schism is much wider than before. Undeniably, a huge part of Morrowind's longevity is its modding capability, and while OpenMW is accurate enough that many of the mods for the original game are compatible with it, there are still a substantial amount of them that aren't, simply because it's a new executable written and built in a different way. Most notably a framework known as the Morrowind Script Extender, or MWSE, which adds a lot of additional functionality to Morrowind's scripting language, is only compatible with the original game executable, and continues to be the foundation of a ton of mods to this day. OpenMW players can end up feeling disappointed that some of the biggest, most advanced mods simply aren't compatible with it. There is ongoing work to implement equivalent scripting functionality in OpenMW 2, but even so, by necessity, any scripts for OpenMW are not compatible with MWSE and vice versa. For modders to support both, they would essentially have to write their script twice, a burden that most modders simply don't have the time to take on. Since most veteran modders and mod users are already accustomed to using the original game with MWSE, that remains the platform that gets most of the attention, even as its aging codebase occasionally struggles with the sheer size of some of the mods being made for it. The result is, ironically, that the newer, community reverse-engineered OpenMW is widely recommended for vanilla, unmodded playthroughs, whereas the original 2002 game is recommended for the widest compatibility with mods. It's not uncommon for people to have both installed so they can get the best of both worlds, as well as for people to strongly argue on the internet about why their preferred approach is better than the other. Right now, there are valid reasons to use either, and while it can undoubtedly be frustrating if a certain feature or mod isn't available in your preferred version, at the end of the day, this is a game and the goal is to have fun. Neither sides have to win or lose to achieve that goal. But there is one other thing worth mentioning with OpenMW. Unlike the first 3 entries of The Elder Scrolls, Bethesda stopped rewriting the entire game each time with Morrowind's successors, Oblivion and Skyrim, and even reused the same engine for other games of theirs like Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and Fallout New Vegas. If they all derive from the same core code as Morrowind, does that mean those games could all theoretically run on OpenMW too? Well, the answer is kind of.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
Developer CC9CII has indeed had some success getting game worlds from many of those games loaded into OpenMW, but only in very broken proof-of-concept states. Realistically, even if the codebases do share a lot of similarities, a lot changed in the nearly 15 years between all of those games, and as such, a lot more work will be necessary to get any of them fully functional. So far, it's been enough work just to get one game working, let alone like 6, but there is a chance that'll happen over time, especially after OpenMW hits version 1.0, whenever that may be. If you want to try OpenMW, you will need a copy of the original game, and sadly, Morrowind is not currently available for free, but it goes on sale for less than $5 often enough that you should be able to pick it up pretty cheaply. The Elder Scrolls clearly has a passionate, devoted fanbase, despite the fact that the last game was released nearly 15 years ago. It's amazing to think that 3 of the 5 games in the series, long abandoned by Bethesda themselves, are still seeing new content, features, and bug fixes over 20 years later, and running on platforms that the original developers never even dreamed of. The thing that I particularly love about projects like this is that by making these old games more accessible, they open them up to a much wider audience than they ever would have had otherwise. Sometimes I wonder, is it all just nostalgia? We try to preserve the games we love, but is anyone who didn't grow up with them really going to care or be interested when there are so many newer games that have come out since then? But the fact is, both Daggerfall Unity and OpenMW's forums are flooded with people who are playing the game for the first time. Not only people who didn't grow up with it, but people who were born years or even decades later. And they end up loving it just as much as we did 20 or 30 years ago. I think that answers the question. There is a purpose to preserving these games for years to come. And I can't wait to see what the community does next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye guys.